So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for March 11th, 2020. We'll follow our standard agenda, which was as listed in issue 834 in the repo. Before we get started though, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share?
I should probably announce that the Node 14 proposal PR has been opened. It will be updated every week with new commits that land on master. And I think 24th of March, so just under 2 weeks today, will be the 7th of major cutoff. And after that point, 7th of majors require no objections from the TSC to land.
Sorry, which date was that?
24th of March.
Note there. Any other things people would like to share?
I do. So
Okay.
there is we are progressing with the organization of the Collaborator Summit, and we invite people to collaborate, no collaborator, to submit session proposal to the URL. I will put it in the notes. And so that it's there is github.com/OpenJSFoundation/summit. There is a note that we don't know. If we will hold up Collaborator Summit in real life because of the current worldwide pandemic. However, we are thinking of running one anyway, possibly a remote one. So there is that as an option. So just so that you're aware, so feel free to send your session, and we'll try to schedule it the best possible way.
Any comments on that before we move on? No? Okay, so let's move on to the issues which were tagged for the agenda. The first one was solid Node.js with official type system support. Let's check who added that to the agenda. Okay, Matteo, that was you.
Yes.
You want to give some context and start the discussion?
There has been some discussion back and forth on Node.js shipping their own types to have a little bit more formal support for TypeScript. And this is the issue is swinging between different options to some extent. There is some people that appreciate the fact that they can install them separately. However, there are people that complain that the types that are being shipped are far from complete and reflective of reality to some extent. So, and there is, I think the TypeScript, how we serve the TypeScript community is something that we can possibly do something better than this. So I put it there to gather some attention, because there is I don't think we can ignore TypeScript in any form. So, and this is the types for Node are a critical part on how Node.js is perceived and used by users of TypeScript. So there is.
I mean, I guess it's not so much like it's not just agreeing to ship them. We'd have to have a commitment, I think, then to keep them up to date, right?
Yeah. So there is a lot of thinking over there. So one is what are the rules for if you add a new API, should you add the type, should not add the types, and so on and so forth. And then there is also the fact that you know, if we ship them, TypeScript should pick those up essentially in their search path. So
Right.
that is also, like, to some extent problematic. So they need to be on board with whatever we decide. So so it's not just a decision that we can take on our own.
Right. And it didn't seem like there was a clear, from my read of it so far, it didn't seem clear what the right answer was yet, right? Like,
No,
there
there is
some strong arguments to say should be separate, otherwise others benefits of integrating, but.
So there are benefits of integrating, there are benefits of keeping them the same. However, those are, you know, outside of our control to some extent. So, and outside of our organization. So essentially they are using something that is not what we maintain.
Right. How much work do you think it would be? Like if we said, yeah, we wanted to include types, and basically anytime you change the API, you have to add a type, how much work would that be for people?
I think it's unfeasible to ask every collaborator to add types when they add a new API. So because a lot of people, that will add one more language and one more thing that people should know. So essentially it will be like maintained as, to some extent, we maintain docs or other things. So we will have types PR. It will be essentially a new subsystem for Node.js.
Yeah, except for like docs, we do require people add docs when they add an API, right? So
I know. That will be, it will become a kind of a second-class citizen compared to docs and so on. So
because that kind of seems to be the, like in my mind, that's one of the key challenges, right? Like if we said, oh yeah, it's simple to add those types, we just add them like we do the docs.
It
would be a much clearer than oh well, we're shipping them, but we're not really forcing them to be created. And
yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. So
yeah.
it's just that there is, like, from my experience in shipping a framework that support TypeScript on top of multiple versions of Node.js, it's painful because you don't know essentially which versions of the types you are depending on.
Out of pure curiosity, have any of y'all looked at the way that Electron handles TypeScript typings? We don't want to actually maintain our own types, but we want to maintain support for TypeScript. So what we actually do is we have a parser that auto-generates TypeScript typings from our documentation because we're already committed to maintaining documentation. And so we only ever have to make sure that documentation is up to date. And then as soon as documentation is up to date, every TypeScript typing is automatically, the file gets auto-generated for every release based on whatever documentation exists in that release.
You are using JSDoc though?
No, it's a parser that we actually wrote to parse through our own documentation.
Fantastic. Okay, that would be interesting. If you have a few links and write those things in the issue, that would be a good point.
Yeah, the parser should be pretty agnostic to Electron. I mean, it basically requires that docs follow a slightly tweaked format, but as long as they follow the general style guide, documentation can be consistently parsed and used to generate typings.
That was definitely brought up in the issue, not specifically for Electron, just in general. And so far, consensus was that there is a tendency for either the parser to have a bug or the documentation to have a bug that then impacts far more people. And there's also the discussion around, do we want to include the type definitions in Node releases, which would mean that if the parser had a bug or if the documentation had a bug, we need to do an entire new Node release just to update type definitions. And that's why I'm currently kind of against including it in core.
Yeah, also looking at the Electron documentation, it looks like it's a lot more structured than ours.
That would be a wonderful side effect.
In the end,
but also a lot of work that's being added, right? So
There
Yeah, it
was
all comes.
ongoing discussion about or moving some of the documentation into the code itself, and that way it would be more coupled. And we might actually update the documentation on each pull request more often, or we would notice it if it's missing. And because sometimes even we collaborators might miss some documentation updates because it's just out of focus. It's a completely different file, and you have to look up what part is actually touched. So we might want to talk to the website team, which is working on the website in general. And there they have a couple of ideas how to improve our documentation as well.
I mean, it'd be interesting. So I guess, Tobias, your concern is that shipping it as part of Node itself slows things down, right?
Yes, it does. Especially, we will eventually introduce bugs into our type definitions, and then people will be forced to update to a new Node version just to have the types fixed. And as far as I know, right now, there's no way to include our type definitions in Node releases and TypeScript. TypeScript won't pick it up by default. We'd have to either modify TypeScript or hack our way around that.
Right.
It would pretty much have to be like something on top of the types that we provide as a fix, right? And for a specific version that would be required in that case. On the other hand, our documentation is also outdated at times. So everything has to be maintained manually. The current typing system, if we move it inside of core, it still has to be maintained manually if we do not have a parser that auto-generates it.
I just don't really see a benefit of moving it into core. Even if we decide to take the Electron approach and generate type definitions automatically from our documentation, we could still do that as a PR to the @type/node repository. So we don't really have to put it into Node releases.
I think Chalker has his hand up as well.
Yes, what I want to say that is, if we make the documentation more structured, and if we add things that process the documentation and output at least something, for example, the types, we can add more tests there. One of the idea would be to check if we have undocumented methods on the classes and in the public API. That should be doable, I think. Also, I have a question. Someone mentioned inconsistencies between code and documentation. That documentation lags behind code for some, in some cases. Could you provide more examples on that, please? Like, when did that happen? And what exactly was the difference there? Like, what was the inconsistency?
Pretty sure we have a running inconsistency between HTTP and HTTP code. It's pretty much impossible to resolve. I mean,
I think it's totally possible to resolve. It just requires way more work than.
Well, yeah, it's possible. It's just realistically.
No, it's totally realistically, it's totally possible. There has been a significant amount of work that was put on into the Fastify types by Ethan Arrowwood to get to resolve most of those problems. So a lot of that stuff has been, so in order to support it, there's some shenanigans that it did to make it all work fine. But that level of TypeScript is definitely so far away from what I can do with TypeScript. So I'm not that big of a TypeScript person, but I think it's possible to do some of that stuff. So
I'm saying for the documentation itself, even like the way, without writing crazy docs, it becomes really hard to like explain all the different permutations that exist without making people's heads spin?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, I would on the docs. I would say so. On the types, the problem is that certain things should have kind of the same should quack the same way, but they're really different implementation, and from time to time don't
Yeah.
really quack the same.
Yeah,
So,
I've written some of those TypeScript definitions for other packages, and it's never pretty.
Is that does that pose a problem for all the modules that we have? We could perhaps start slow and attempt doing something like that for at least some of the modules, and make a semi-automatic pull requests into the types rep for now. Like don't pull that into Node core, and attempt generating the types from the documentation that we have, at least for some modules, and see how that goes. Also, I wonder how exactly is that repo maintained, the types repo? Do they process the documentation in some way, or do they handle everything manually?
It's all manual in the official types repository,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Yes.
But
So
we could set up a bot to create PRs whenever we change something in the documentation if we were to parse it.
So my
Yes,
other
we-
concern tying into that is, has anything changed on the TypeScript side, or definitely typed side, as far as like versioning goes? Because last I looked at it, the versioning was not basically in any way consistent with the actual releases, or really there was no good way to like track multiple branches basically.
it's impossible.
Yeah,
From my point of
so
view.
like that's the other issue, right? We have LTS and non-LTS releases, and we have to support both somehow, and I don't see how that's possible right now with definitely typed. Like, it's just the versioning is a mess. You basically have the latest version, which is for the latest version of the package.
That's it.
So there's no way we can influence that. It would make sense if
mean-
we had the same. It would make sense if we had the same major and minor version and just the patch incremented between patches to the types, right?
I just know that that's not been the traditional practice, and I know there's, I mean, when I last looked at it, which I haven't worked with TypeScript for a bit, like I haven't contributed in like a year, but I mean, last time I contributed, it was just a mess in terms of versioning, and there was an open issue about actually standardizing around that. So
Well, one problem might be that, as far as I know, everything is just on one branch. There's no branches for different versions. So yeah, that might make it almost impossible to get versioning in there.
I mean, that would make a good case for at least rolling our own repo within like the Node.js namespace, even though it's maybe less ideal in a lot of ways.
Anatoly, look at this. This is the current situation for the types of node. So there is different folders that contains that contains the different versions of this. So there is some level of versioning. It's just, done in different folders.
Right. Oof. So if you release a patch version with new versions, then it basically only has like major releases, right? Like it has V12, V11. Doesn't
it only has major releases, yes.
Yeah.
So
what are we most concerned about? Are we concerned about people using outdated types, or are we concerned about people using types that are newer than what Node actually supports? We could take the Android approach and always target the newest, the latest type definitions, and then just use tests to see what passes.
My main concern is, as a module library author, I have no way to know if my module will compile on different version of with different types versions. So let's say that a user using Node 12 and it has the types for Node 12 installed. And when I build a module, I need to support the types for Node 12, the types for Node 10, the types for Node 13, possibly in some future, the types for Node 14. And this use case is completely not served by the current system because, again, it's not tied to the Node runtime. So it's not tied to my current runtime.
I think we've probably spent quite a bit of time.
Yeah,
so we might want to move on. I think it's a good discussion. There's a couple different things. I guess the first one would be like if there's an agreement whether or not this is something we want to try and push to improve. Because even if there isn't a good versioning approach, the time it's going to take us to, like, say, for example, structure our doc so we could generate the types from it is probably means that, you know, it's not an immediate problem. It's more that if we want to do it at some time in the future, that might be an additional problem. Anyway, so I guess, Matteo, anything particular before we close out you want people to do, like comment on the issue? What's the next step?
Yeah, possibly commenting the issue, join the issue. We might decide not to do anything for now, but I think this is something that we should keep on our radar.
Okay. Okay, anything else people want to add before we move on? No. Okay. In that case, I think we should move on to the next issue. The next one that's tagged is renominate Jirish Punatel, but I think that's basically waiting on additional members joining the TSC so that we're at appropriate numbers. So that's like defer. I don't know, not for discussion this week. Defer until we have more members. The next one tagged is nominating Ruben Bridgewater. Ruben's been nominated a while back. He's attended now, I think, at least 2 calls, and just want to confirm that we should move forward. I guess at this point it's like, are there any objections?
In the past, we've always tried to at least get a majority of votes in favor. I don't know if we want to continue doing that.
And it's checked in the issue itself. How do we
stand? James explicitly gave a +1 in the issue for this meeting, so that's 1 right there. I'm 2.
Sorry, I'm going to briefly interrupt. Can somebody promote Myles?
Ah, I got it.
I think he already is.
Yeah, I got auto promoted. I'm logged in.
Oh,
thank you for looking out for me, Anatoly.
I was trying to find you.
All right.
In the issue itself, we have.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, the issue itself, we probably have a majority. Yeah, go for it.
Right, like I see, I can go back and count. So I guess what I was going to say, as long as we have that count, and if we count the people who are in this meeting as +1s, I'm thinking we're probably over what we need. I'll double check that, but I just wanted to see if there's no objections and we agree that you know, I can use those counts, I would move it forward.
I think we're good.
Okay, so I'll take the action. Michael will check counts and I'll chase people if we don't quite have it, but otherwise no objections to moving forward. And so next time, hopefully Ruben will make it official. We'll make it official before then. Also, I guess, you know, this is probably a good time, I probably should have done that in the announcements, but to welcome Matthias and Shelley as people who have been nominated and are here as observers. So welcome and thanks for participating.
Participants, they are participants.
Participants, yes, okay. Then moving on to the next issue, which is tagged for the agenda, Node.js future directions, any interest in an online or in-person summit. I had the action last time to put together a sort of a draft of what the agenda might look like. I see that Jirish has chimed in with some other suggestions. It would be good if some of the other TSC members could kind of chime in and help to shape that that agenda into something we think makes sense, or, you know, because I'm not sure if all the suggestions I've got there. It includes things like talking about, you know, I'm pretty sure I included, yeah, types, type definitions, packet managers, HTTP evolution, how does cloud deployments, Kubernetes, function as a service all affect Node? So sort of from technical things, and I also thought we should also talk about, you know, potentially the technical management side of things. What are our key values that have helped us be successful? What should they be going forward? Standards, should we be defining standards in some way? So I don't know that we need to necessarily talk about that. We can continue to talk about it in the issue itself, but if people could jump in, that would be great. I don't know if people have anything they want to discuss on this one before we move on.
Well, I think this fits to some extent with the direction, with the possibility to run things remotely. So that I think we should try to make it work essentially. So given the current situation, doing it in person seems highly unfeasible anyway.
Right.
So I would, we probably want to do a little bit of facilitation on the sessions and try to schedule them. My major concern is around time zones. So one of the key, I think, about being everybody together is they are all of them in the same time zone.
Yep.
So these might be problematic for some of us to scheduling wise. So we might want to, and also staying in calls for, you know, a day. It's actually extremely way more tiring and way more exhausting than hanging out at an event.
Right. Yeah, I was, you know, some thoughts I'd had on that is, you know, maybe it's shorter over a number of days.
Yeah.
Like I think an hour might be too short, but like for the time zones, if it was like 4 hours that overlapped the most time zones, that might help on that front. But yeah, I don't know what the sweet spot in terms of time is, right?
Is this going to be a continuing discussion, or are those some number of separate topics going to be discussed there?
I think like from past experience, like if we tried to make this like an hourly call or something, I think it would be tougher, because I think from the value we've seen in the summits is that people come together, they block off the time, and they actually have that time to think about and be active participants. So I'm thinking it's like, you know, say if it's 4 hours, you know, maybe we try and do it for a week, 4 hours in the middle of each day, or 3 hours or whatever. I don't know the right number, but I think it needs to be more of a focused thing versus, you know, we have a group that gets together and just talks about it once a week or something like that, because it's hard to sustain once a week, every week, right?
No, what I mean is the topic of the discussion going to be the same over most of those time
No,
slots?
I mean, there's quite a large number of different topics there. The question would be, what can we fit in? Which ones do we prioritize? Like, you know, so we'd create an agenda that says the first hour is X, the next hour is Y. And in the past, we actually did breakouts, which we could do breakouts again, where we had some groups break out and talk about certain topics, and then come back and give a bit of a summary to the overall group. So, you know, we'd have to figure out how to make that work, you know, and fit in the different things that we want. And
that is probably going to be somewhat problematic because there is probably not going to be a good time slot for everyone. And if someone wants to attend a specific topic, it would tie them to a specific time slot, whatever that time slot would be. So if we could split each topic into multiple rounds and move the time slot between those rounds, even inside the same large number of time slots, could that be viable? Like if we take several days or several days on several weeks, I don't know, and discuss each topic multiple times, but on different time slots inside those.
Yeah, it's an interesting
ones.
thought. My first thought is we've got a lot of topics covering them twice may be a challenge, but it's certainly an interesting idea of like, can we have, I mean, it's the, I guess are you thinking that people won't be able to make a time slot just because it's strictly the time zone thing, or because they'll have other commitments during the week?
Not sure. How exactly does that make things different?
Well, I mean, if we have an in-person conference, basically you've got to make the commitment to make the time during that time, right? And I guess one of the advantages of the in-person one is it kind of forces that because you're there. And for a virtual one, I'm almost thinking you need the same kind of commitment to say, well, I'm going to block off, I'm not going to do other things during that time, right, to make it actually work. So if it's strictly that the time zone is like, no, that's a time that you just can't come because you're asleep, that's fair enough, right? If it's, well, I'm going to have to juggle all the rest of my stuff at the same time, then I think we're already going to have a hard time because, everybody's always got something going.
The virtual one is harder in that way though, because you get both those problems at the same time, right? Like with the in-person one, you negate both.
Agreed. Yes.
Like people come out to the same time zone and they also take time off work, or hopefully their work sponsors them or whatever. But with the online one, it's really hard to justify at work in general. So a lot of people are going to have that trouble. And B, obviously the time zone thing is just not feasible, really. Like we're spread out across basically the whole world.
I do want to add though, kind of like with the situation that we do find ourselves in right now globally, I think an online summit is kind of our only option.
Yeah, that was Mateo's suggestion.
Yeah, for sure.
We're just talking about how do you make it workable, right? Like.
So these are two things, Myles. There is a discussion related to the Collaborator Summit and OpenJS World. And one related to an in-person, doing the TSC Summit, essentially. So the TSC Summit seems kind of impossible. Or I would not go ahead. However, there is still the OpenJS World still planned to go ahead so far. And in the last meeting for the Collab Summit, we made the decision to peg the Collab Summit to OpenJS World, essentially.
I think for now, like the first step is if we could get a good agenda that we would do, whether in person or virtual. I think that's the thing. Let's get to that. And once we've got that, then we'll see where we're at. Like Myles had said that, hey, if we're all at the OpenJS World, maybe we make this the focus of the Collaborator Summit for this year or something, right? Like, so there's still different options. But I'd say, like, let's get the agenda, and then we can, figure out the delivery after that, because we'll have, if it's a few weeks out, we'll have a little bit better view of what's going on.
Is it worth having a separate issue to just discuss the kind of the logistics of it, so that the two are kind of progressing at the same time and the topic isn't getting distracted by one or the other?
Sure. That's actually like how to how to run this effectively would actually, we could open a new issue to do that. Makes sense.
Yeah, and just to update folks who weren't listening to the board meeting yesterday, the current plan is that OpenJS World will still run. It is in late June. My understanding, at least from like event spaces that I've seen, like a lot of things that are getting kind of preemptively canceled or delayed are things that are kind of between now and May. So, you know, the intent is to still run the event. They've updated the landing page with information about, you know, COVID-19 and about it, you know, like how it is affecting the event. And at a regular cadence, the staff will keep us kind of up to date and in the know about what's going on. The event is running, in case you weren't aware, it's running in conjunction with Open Source Summit, which is a multiple thousand person event run by the Linux Foundation. We're actually going to be in the same physical space. And so actually one of the things that's, you know, really great for us is that because we're sharing all of this, you know, the cost and risk is not ours alone. We're sharing that with a number of other events within the Linux Foundation. So also to say, like, you know, it's being taken very seriously. There are a number of events that are all kind of tied to this. And at least for myself, without, you know, putting on my tinfoil hat too firmly, I think, you know, the next 2 to 3 weeks will really say a lot about kind of what the next couple months in this country looks like.
Yeah. So I think with that, we should probably move on. So Anatoly, we'll open a new issue. I don't know if you want to go ahead and open that issue. And to start to discuss the logistics. Otherwise, if people can chime in and help to craft the agenda, I think that would be great, because regardless, it's something that we should do, and then we'll figure out how. Moving on to the next issue, the election for voting representative for the OpenJS Cross-Project Council, TSC rep. This is on the agenda as an FYI. If you have any questions about what that representative does, the role, the level of work, you know, you can ask Matteo, who's our current rep, or any of the rest of us, like myself, who are active in the CPC, but really just wanted to make sure everybody was aware. And if you want to self-nominate, that's the place to do it. It's open until, let me just get that right. It's open for nominations until March 16th. Self. Okay, so any questions on that before we move on? Okay, the next issue is additional org owned by Node.js project for package maintenance team, number 470. So this has been open for a few weeks. I tagged it for the agenda to get more input, sort of live discussion from the technical steering committee members, also tagged for the community agenda. The package maintenance team is creating and experimenting with a number of tools. And, you know, actually there's already a PKGS repo that was created. The thing that really is driving this is that the realization that, you know, the code of conduct and the moderation team, who does great work for the rest of the repos in the Node project, isn't covering that because it's an external repo. And the hope was to be able to move it into the organization. So basically have the Node project own another repository, which would have repos, as opposed to just adding those repos directly to the Node.js project itself, which would be one of the other alternatives. And that, you know, ask that it be maintained just like the Node.js org in terms of, you know, moderation and so forth. There is kind of the ask as well that there might be, you know, additional flexibility delegated to the package maintenance team in terms of creating repos in that organization. So, you know, possibly some delegation of authority from the TSC and ComCom in terms of the creation process. And there's discussion in there back and forth in terms of, you know, I think there are some comments in terms of like, well, why not just create the repos in the Node organization versus having a separate organization? I think some of the concern about just creating repos in the Node repo is to avoid making these things look more official or more, you know, more official than anything which is, you know, outside of the node repo, and just potentially disadvantaging those. So looking for people's thoughts one way or the other on that. I guess are there people who have strong objections to you know, the project having another organization?
We can always pull the plug or do something else if it becomes a problem, and I don't foresee any problems, so I'm definitely okay with it.
I personally never saw our scope limited to a single organization. The project is not the organization on GitHub. That just happens to be how things conveniently have run. I'm absolutely fine with there being multiple orgs, although, you know, we do want to limit how much we have to oversee. I think in this case, it makes a ton of sense. And, you know, the documentation that we need to update, I see as, you know, just not having been written with this in mind, not that like, we explicitly didn't want to see it happen.
I'm fine with another org if that's what people want, but if the concern is that putting it in the Node.js org gives it more official weight than it should have, I'm not sure if there's another org, but it's a Node.js org, like if it's associated with the primary Node.js org or, you know, the Node.js project, it might not achieve that goal of making it look unofficial. Or
We certainly have a lot of repositories that, well, anyway, yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna let somebody else talk.
Yep. I mean, Sam, I brought that exact point up in the discussion in the package maintenance meeting yesterday. You know, we discussed even like naming the new org something like Node.js experimental. But then that led into, well, there might be things that they, you know, the team wanted to put in there which weren't experimental, so it wasn't a good name. But if there's thoughts on naming that address those,
we can bike shed the name in the issue tracker. And
yeah. Yep. So it's, yeah, that's a good point. But so yeah, they're just going to point out that if naming it some way helps helps improve the chances of achieving that, then that we should consider that. So I don't hear any objections so far. Is that still just give people more time to chime up? And I think people have chimed up from the moderation team saying they were okay with it in the issue, because I think that's a key aspect. Okay, so I guess the takeaway here is it doesn't sound like the people who are in attendance have any strong objections. If that's not the case, please jump into the issue. You know, otherwise we'll see what the ComCom thinks, and it sounds like at this point from the TSC side, it would be able to move forward. Okay, so that's what we had tagged for the public agenda, and there is a little bit of private business. So I think at this point, unless is there anything else that people want to talk about or add to the agenda before we close out? No, okay. I'm going to stop the live stream. Thanks for everybody.